financial system. And we now need to prepare ourselves for the Russian playbook of deception that governs every operation of this kind. There will be a cascade of false claims about Ukraine intended to spread confusion almost for its own sake. And even now there are plans being laid for staged events, spinning a web of falsehoods designed to present any Russian attack as a response to provocation. We've already witnessed a fake military withdrawal combined with staged incidents that could provide a pretext for military action. We knew this was coming. We've seen it before. And no one should be fooled. And we have to steel ourselves for the possibility of a protracted crisis, with Russia maintaining the pressure and searching for weaknesses over an extended period. And we must, together, refuse to be worn down. What Europe needs is strategic endurance, and we should focus our energies on preserving our unity and on deepening transatlantic cooperation. But for that to work, we must also be prepared to devote the necessary resources to carry a greater share of the burden of preserving our continent's security and to demonstrate that we are in it for the long haul. For now, we should continue to do everything we can to pursue the path of peace and dialogue. There is a way forward if President Putin is minded to take it. There is a discussion to be had about the threats that he claims to see, because in reality, as we all know, those threats are an illusion. They are the product of the Kremlin's chronic but misguided view of NATO as a supposedly encircling and intimidating alliance. That is not NATO's function. NATO is a peaceful and a defensive alliance. And we are willing to work with President Putin to demonstrate that point and to give him the assurances that he may need. We could point out that until he invaded Ukraine for the first time in 2014, NATO did not permanently station any troops anywhere east of Germany. And it was as recently as 2017 that the US, the UK, and other NATO allies established the enhanced forward presence to protect Poland and the Baltic states. And even then, the total deployment of fewer than 5,000 troops posed no conceivable threat to Russia. And it is only in the last few weeks, in response to the current crisis, that we have dispatched reinforcements, though still in numbers, that constitute no possible threat. Until 2014, European allies were cutting their defence budgets and shrinking their armed forces, perhaps faster than was safe or wise. And to the extent that this has changed, it is because of the actions of President Putin and the tension that he has created. If NATO forces are now closer to Russia's border, it is in response to his decisions and the justified concerns they have provoked among our allies. And there are many things said about what may or may not have been said in the closed-door meetings of 3 decades ago as the Berlin Wall fell and Germany was reunited. But there is no doubt that we all agreed legal obligations to protect the security of every country in Europe. And what happened in those amazing years was the dissolution of the Iron Curtain and the fulfillment of the vision of a Europe whole and free. It was one of the most incredible moments of my lifetime, as nations at the heart of our continent regained their liberty and their sovereign right to control their own destiny and seek their own alliances. We will not abandon the hope and impulse of that era, made possible by the courage of millions of ordinary Europeans. And that's why NATO opened its doors to 14 states after 1999, and we cannot allow our open door to be slammed shut. But if dialogue fails, and if Russia chooses to use violence against an innocent and peaceful population in Ukraine, and to disregard the norms of civilized behavior between states, and to disregard the Charter of the United Nations, then we at this conference should be in no doubt that it is in our collective interest that Russia should ultimately fail and be seen to fail. I believe that in preparing to invade Ukraine, a proud country whose armed forces now exceed 200,000 personnel, considerably more expert in combat today than in 2014, President Putin and his circle are gravely miscalculating. I fear that a lightning war would be followed by a long and hideous period of reprisals and revenge and insurgency. And Russian parents would mourn the loss of young Russian soldiers who, in their way, are every bit as innocent as the Ukrainians now bracing themselves for attack. And if Ukraine is overrun by brute force, I fail to see how a country encompassing nearly 250,000 square miles, the biggest nation in Europe apart from Russia itself, could then be held down and subjugated forever. After a generation of freedom, we're now staring at a generation of bloodshed and misery. I believe that Russia would have absolutely nothing to gain from this catastrophic venture and everything to lose. And while there is still time, I urge the Kremlin to de-escalate, to disengage its forces from the frontier and to renew our dialogue. Every nation at this conference shares a vision of a secure and prosperous Europe of sovereign states, deciding their own destiny and living without fear or threat. And that vision, of course, extends to Russia, a nation whose cultural patrimony we revere and whose sacrifice in the struggle against fascism was immeasurable. Russia has as much right as any other country to live in peace and security. And we should never cease to emphasize that Russia has nothing to fear from our vision, which threatens and marginalizes no one. And as we come together in unity and resolve, we must also show wisdom and moderation, because it's precisely by that unity that we show today that we have the best chance, even now, at this 11th hour, of averting disaster and ensuring that good sense can still prevail. And it is that message of unity that we must send from this conference today. Thank you all very much.
That was Boris Johnson there speaking at the Munich Security Conference, warning Russia against any invasion in Ukraine and talking about the importance of collective security. He also spoke about possible sanctions that could be placed on Russian individuals and on companies. Now it's time to go to Alastair Stewart.
Simon, thanks very much indeed. Hello and welcome to Alastair Stewart and Friends. We delayed the beginning of the programme because that contribution at the Munich Security Conference by the Prime Minister was of such profound importance. We'll be examining much of that later on with an expert in cyber war and what is actually going on the border between Russia and Ukraine. We will be keeping you up to date on all of the comings and goings at that conference. Coming up this afternoon, we're also discussing if politics is in search of its soul. After 1 o'clock, I'll be speaking to the former Labour MP, Mr. Marmite himself, George Galloway.
I think the Conservatives and the Labour Party are now both essentially liberal parties. And that leaves a lot of scope for people like Farage and co on the right and people like me on the left.
Soul-searching left and right. That's just after 1 o'clock. Plus, Storm Eunice leaves thousands of homes without power today. The clean-up is underway after record-breaking winds killed at least 4 people and continue to disrupt travel. Hundreds of flights were cancelled and trains suspended. So all of that still to come. But first of all, forget COVID just for a minute and set Partygate aside. Something much bigger is going on out there. And it's about how you are taxed and governed and by whom. It's about how our democracy works or doesn't. We all face a huge choice in probably just a couple of years. Post-COVID, post-lockdowns, post-tax rises, amid inflation and amid economic recovery, or still stuck in a cost of living crisis. Do you want a Tory government or a Labour government? In many respects, that's the easy bit. And I'm not going to bang on about the Tories today. The clash for their soul has been underway for some time. And Lord Frost, David Frost, spells out the low-tax, low-spend, freedom lovers position yet again in today's Daily Telegraph. But I do think we need to talk about the rumblings in the Labour Party under Sir Keir Starmer. Despite everything Boris Johnson stands accused of, Labour are only between 5 and 10% ahead of the Conservatives in the polls. I think that's truly extraordinary. But what really got me thinking were the reports last week that Labour and the Lib Dems are already cozying up ahead of that next general election. You'd have thought Labour would be bullish, onward to outright victory. Instead, it seems the best that they think they can get is a hung parliament, no overall winner, and perhaps a coalition with the Lib Dems, even the SNP. Despite everything Starmer is doing to take back the soul of his party from the lefty aberration of the Corbyn years, it isn't winning you over overwhelmingly. Then there's the attack from the left, inside and outside the Labour Party. They say he's just creating a Tory light party. Jeremy Corbyn and Diane Abbott dismissed Keir Starmer as a warmonger for saying that he stood behind the government and Boris Johnson and NATO in supporting Ukraine against Russia, about which you just heard the Prime Minister speaking live in Munich. And putting the big unions in their place and calling Labour the party of business, well, that was just a red rag to a red bull. So, what's really going on? And why does it matter to you? I thought I'd ask some friends of mine and some people I really admire. Professor Sir John Curtis of Strathclyde University is, as I always say, the number cruncher's number cruncher. The Labour MP Lloyd Russell Moyle is on Labour's left and is pro-Brexit. And Baroness Claire Fox, a former hardline lefty herself, and now the free spirit libertarian head of the Institute of Ideas. And there's one other. A very old friend of mine. He is the Marmite man of British politics, a former Labour MP, then a Respect MP, and now the leader of the Workers' Party of Britain, George Galloway. He tells me, amongst many things, that Brits will never vote for full-blooded socialism. But he does have a cunning plan. Lively, provocative, reflective. It's just two chaps who've lived this territory for half a century, chewing the cud. And don't give up because you think he is a lefty twit. He may be many things, but that is not one of them. So let me know what you think in advance of our discussion, as we go along, and in conclusion. And remember, only you decide who runs the country, and you deserve to know what the real choices are. Email me at gbviews@gbnews.uk, tweet me or tweet GB News directly. There's also Facebook and all the rest of it. And do subscribe to your YouTube channel while you're at it. I think it'll be a cracker, but that, of course, as always, is rather up to you. So let's begin the conversation with Professor John Curtis, Professor of Politics at Strathclyde University. John, always good to see you. Thanks very much. We have been here before, but how important is this current talk of a Labour-Lib Dem pact ahead of the next general election? Discussing it now?
You're right, we have been here before. Maybe we'll come to that in a moment. I think the first thing to say, to some degree, what is being said about what Labour and the Democrats are minded to do at the next general election isn't really a great deal more than a statement of the obvious. The honest truth is that these days, political parties don't simply campaign here, there and everywhere. They have long been focusing their efforts on the marginal seats, i.e. the seats that they think they've got the best chance of winning. And it so happens to be the case that there is virtually nowhere in the United Kingdom where the seat is currently held by the Conservatives and where Labour and the Democrats are as well placed as each other to be an effective challenger. Indeed, there are only a couple of constituencies, one in Sheffield, the other in Cambridge, where Labour and the Democrats are likely to be fighting it out at the next election with the possibility of a seat changing hands. So if all that simply Labour and Liberal Democrats do is to focus their resources on the seats where they've got the best chance, then indeed the Liberal Democrats will be primarily focusing on relatively marginal Conservative seats where the Liberal Democrats are second, much of which is in the south of England, particularly in and around the capital. Labour, in contrast, will be focusing its resources on its marginal seats in the Midlands and the north of England. And that, in a sense, is a statement of the obvious. Now, that said, I guess where it's so far gone a little bit further than we might have anticipated was in the couple of by-elections that were held before Christmas. The Liberal Democrats certainly didn't try very hard in Old Bexley and Sidcup, gave Labour something of a close run, though Labour weren't able to win the seat. Perhaps that in itself not that surprising. Rather more surprising was Labour not trying in North Shropshire, even though they were starting off in second place, giving the Liberal Democrats a free run, and that was an opportunity the Liberal Democrats seized. But let's not exaggerate what's going on here. We're not talking about Labour not fighting everywhere. We're not talking about the Liberal Democrats not fighting everywhere. We're just simply talking about the parties focusing their resources on the seats they've got the best chance of winning. And that simply means that de facto, they'll be fighting the Conservatives in different places.
On policy, though, it's a very different Labour to Corbyn's Labour that will be fighting that election. And Starmer is clearly trying to fundamentally reinvent the party. Does the left-wing sniping matter, or can he just shrug that off?
I don't think it matters very much at the moment because, in truth, actually, in contrast to the politics of the 1990s, when Tony Blair was helping to move his party further to the right beyond what already Neil Kinnock had done, there isn't at the moment any obvious challenge from the left. I mean, back in Tony Blair's era, some parties, including George Galloway, who's going to be interviewing later on, then with the Respect Party, were able to take some votes off Labour. And of course, at that stage, the Liberal Democrats were actually rather keener on tax increases than Labour. Labour were very reluctant to say taxes were going to go up. Liberal Democrats were willing to say that they should. Now, at the moment, at least, the Democrats are not adopting that position, and we don't have any strong challenge from the left. So I think, in truth, so far as moving his party towards the centre is concerned, Sir Keir Starmer has rather more room for manoeuvre. But of course, the fact that there is this debate going on inside the Conservatives probably, I think, also makes Sir Keir's life rather easier. What Labour above all want to do is not so much move politics back from left towards the centre as to shift politics away from Brexit and the culture wars and the argument about those issues back on, indeed, to the arguments about how big should the state be post-pandemic. Should we be running such a large, heavily taxed economy or not? Labour's problem hitherto is that facing a Prime Minister like Boris Johnson, who is rather interventionist by Conservative standards, arguably face them with a difficult target. If indeed the Conservatives, either under Boris Johnson or under a successor, themselves tapped rather more to the right, then there will be much more space for Labour to be able to say, well, look, actually, if you wish to preserve the kind of big government that protected the economy during the COVID crisis, then you need to vote for us, not the Conservatives. So I think, in truth, what's going on now inside the Conservatives is also relevant to Sir Keir Starmer's opportunities.
Totally agree. And a very quick final thought on it. There's also the issue of freedom of citizens, and what's going on in Canada is causing an absolute furore, and people are openly and widely debating it. David Frost includes in his Telegraph article a big chunk on the rights and freedoms of the individual. That's the legacy of COVID as much as anything, and that will be front and centre.
Well, it's certainly an area where we're having quite a lot of debate. I've got a report coming out on Monday. One of the things it shows is that we are indeed, as a society, willing now to question authority to an increasing extent, and that continued during the pandemic, and that was reflected in the debates about the COVID restrictions. Of course, notice that on this issue, the Labour Party at the moment are not saying that the anticipated announcement on Monday that we're going to get rid of most of the COVID restrictions, in England at least, is necessarily wrong. They're at the moment holding their fire. Though, of course, what is true, I think the Labour Party in Wales will be still going for a more conservative strategy. I suspect Labour, Frank, will wait to see what happens. If the unwrapping of the regulations goes pear-shaped and COVID takes off again, Labour will be ready to criticise. I suspect that on Monday, however, they'll be relatively quiet.
All right, John, great to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed for those insights on Labour, the left and the Conservatives and freedom. Always good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. John Curtis, Professor of Politics there at Strathclyde. Joining me now, I'm delighted to say, is Lloyd Russell Moyle, Labour Member of Parliament for Brighton Kemp Town. Great to see you. Thank you for finding time for us this Saturday afternoon. Do you agree with the central argument that Galloway makes, which people will be hearing a bit later on, when he says that in his view the United Kingdom will never vote for full-blooded socialism?
Well, I don't think the United Kingdom would ever vote for a full-blooded version of any ideological diktat. And I don't think it ever has. I don't think it's ever voted for complete free market capitalism where there is no state regulation. And I suspect it wouldn't necessarily want no market-driven forces at all. It is about getting the right balance, and it is about where we lie that balance. And I
okay, but let me butt in at that point because no, I've got that point, because that's in fact what John Curtis was just saying as well, is as the Tories begin to beat themselves up about how far they want to go on free markets, it does open centre ground for you. Are you, as a left-wing Member of Parliament, happy with the direction that Sir Keir is taking your party in?
Well, I think the proof will be in the pudding and in the tasting of it. And so let's see what comes out in the elections. If we are talking about packaging our policies in a way that people understand better, then I'm all for that.
Are you content with this talk so early out of and actually Brighton's not a bad example because you've got the only one Green MP down there just along the way from you, of Labour and the Liberal Democrats sitting down and saying, look, we're not going to win that one, we might win Sheffield if you stand back, this, that and the other, as Curtis just explained. Are you happy with that as a point of principle?
As a point of principle, I mean, when I first won my election, the Greens stood down for me in my seat. And the Liberals stood down for the Greens in Caroline's seat, and that's how I got elected. So on principle, I've got nothing wrong with that. I think that it needs to be done by each local party and each individual party if there's going to be something more than just resource allocation. If it's just resource allocation, to tell you the truth, that's what we've always done. You know, I was a candidate in Lewis constituency many years ago, and that is a Liberal Conservative. We didn't put so many resources into that. We put all of our resources, even from the local constituency next door in my constituency that I am now elected in, because we understood we had to put our resources where we were likely to win. So that's always happened.
Finally, that point that John Curtis and I were also talking about at the very end of our conversation, post-COVID and given what's happening in Canada right now, there seems to be a far greater appetite to talk about personal freedoms, individual freedoms and the role of the state. Are you up for that, or do you think that's dangerous territory for the modern Labour Party?
Well, I'm unusual in the left of the Labour Party because I come from a kind of radical liberal tradition in Sussex, you know, kind of Bonfire and Thomas Paine and things like this. So I do think that is interesting discussions. I actually, however, think on the doorstep, most people are talking about the cost of living, talking about the fact that they can't afford their fuel bills. On a theoretical point, I do think the Labour Party needs to be better at not just being big statist, but understand that we need to empower each individual. That's why I support things like a universal basic income and universal basic services, not that are means tested, but that empower people to choose what they want to spend their money on, and everyone gets a basic. It's a socialist approach that gives people freedom. I'm not sure that we're in the same place as they are in Canada, though, as well. I think we be careful sometimes when we conflate Atlantic politics to British politics.
Fascinating stuff. Really grateful, Lloyd, and thank you for coming in to see us from home there. And I hope very much indeed you'll join us again in this important debate. Thank you very much indeed. Have a great afternoon.
Always a pleasure.
Lloyd Russell Moyle there, Labour MP for Brighton, Kemp Town. I just love it when it's not just the rate of tax and it's not just who owns railways or steels. It's about your rights, your freedoms, and that real philosophical offer that all of them are going to make to you in 18 months, perhaps 2 years' time. We're going to keep the argument going. After 1 p.m, we'll have my sit-down interview with the leader of the Workers' Party of Britain and the former Labour MP, George Galloway, to give his thoughts as well. You are watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends. It's just coming up to 12:25 here on GB News. Lots more coming up on today's programme, on TV and on radio. Thousands across the country have woken up still without power this morning after the damage caused by Storm Eunice, the worst storm that we've had in almost 30 years. We'll be speaking to our GB News reporters who are up and down the country covering this for us and, more importantly, for you. But first, let's take a broader look at the weather.
Rather windy with a band of rain and hill snow edging eastwards. Let's take a look at the details. It will be a windy day with coastal gales expected in the southwest. It will be mainly dry, but there will be isolated blustery showers, which will be heavy at times. Heavy rain will clear to the east of southeast England with scattered heavy showers following. It will be rather windy, especially towards the south. A windy day in Wales, especially towards the south coast where gales are likely. Rather cloudy with some brighter spells, but also some blustery showers. It will be cloudy in the northwest with outbreaks of rain at times, the rain falling as sleet or snow over the higher ground of the Pennines and Cumbria, brisk winds and also feeling chilly. The northeast of England will be generally drier and brighter with some sunny spells, although rain and hill snow will affect Pennine areas. The brightest conditions are expected to be in the north. It will be mostly dry over southern Scotland, with the best of the sunshine being in eastern areas, cloudier in the west with a few showers likely, these possibly wintry. Rain and hill snow will clear eastwards with scattered showers, possibly wintry, and sunny spells then following for the west. A chilly feeling day for all, especially in the wind, turning dry for a time this evening before further rain arrives in the west to affect most areas later, and that is how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
Make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel.
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
That you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. It's coming up to 12:30, and you're watching and listening to me, Alastair Stewart, and Friends here on GB News TV and radio. So, A yellow weather warning remains in place for parts of the United Kingdom today, hindering the clean-up operation following the red alerts and Storm Eunice. Flying debris caused major disruption to rail and road networks and significant damage to homes and buildings, including ripping off the roof of part of the O2 Arena in London. 4 people died as winds reached 120 miles an hour, plus thousands have woken up this morning still without power. If you are with us on radio, we were just looking there at the end of those extraordinary coastal pictures as well, which were really quite terrifying. Well, we've been reporting right across the country. We're going to continue that today, looking at the aftermath of Storm Eunice. Our Northwest reporter, Bradley Harris, is in Newport for us. So calmer slightly, but still a heck of a mess, Bradley.
Yeah, that's right, Alistair. The worst of the storm may be over, but certainly the impact, you can see just behind me. I don't even need to describe it. You've got a broken roof, huge holes in the roof, smashed bedroom windows and debris that has fallen into people's front gardens. That's on Christchurch Road here in Newport. Certainly, as I say, the worst of the storm is very much over, but the impact of it still remains. I just want to come down Christchurch Road because you can see more of the impact here, Alistair. We have a car no longer drivable because the windscreen has been smashed in entirely from flying debris. Of course, let's roll back 24 hours and there would have been winds of up to 90 miles an hour on this very road. Things are a little bit calmer though, as you say. It gives people a chance to assess the damage. But certainly in other parts of South Wales, we're still seeing 40-mile-an-hour winds, and that's what some people are saying are having an impact with the clean-up operation. You can't go in and actually assess the damage or even fix it if you're still getting even up to 30 or 40-mile-per-hour winds. So that's the picture here, Alistair, on Christchurch Road. Still, as I say, a big impact left by Storm Eunice.
Bradley, thank you very much indeed. And we can cross now to the next one along the line, which is Amelia Harper, who is there for us in Buckinghamshire. Brolly's still up, but again, it's looking calmer. But I suspect, as Bradley said, still a heck of a mess.
That's right, Alistair. Well, the rain is coming down quite heavily, and actually, as I'm standing here, I can hear between the buildings the wind whipping up and whistling through these types of city centres. But, you know, there is now another Met Office warning. It's not quite over. Storm Eunice might be over, but the east of England is set to see from tomorrow lunchtime to Monday afternoon another yellow warning for wind. So people here are still perhaps bracing themselves for that, particularly on places like the Suffolk coastline, which has one of the highest rates of erosion actually in Europe, because yesterday the county council urged people not to go there. They declared a major incident in response to the storm as well. They were meeting every couple of hours. I'm just struggling here with these winds slightly to hold my brolly, and this rain is really coming down. We had here in Buckinghamshire, South Central Ambulance Service actually declared a critical incident as well in response to the storm. But what's happening as well with the power network? UK Power Grid says that 34,000 homes in the east are without power and 58,000 are still without power in the southeast.
Amelia, thanks very much indeed. And finally, there on the right, wrapped up more than the other two, I might say, is Anna Riley, our Yorkshire and Humber reporter, who's in Dewsbury for us. What's it looking like where you are, Anna?
Good afternoon, Alistair. I've actually moved across to Batley this morning, where the snow has started coming down. At around 10 o'clock this morning, the Met Office put out a yellow alert for snow. We're certainly seeing it. It's not quite settling on the ground yet as it's so wet. And why have we come to Batley? We've come because we've seen the extent of the storm here at Healy Primary School. We've had winds of between 60 and 70 miles an hour, and a broken tree has caused all this devastation. So it's a stone wall, and it's just completely collapsed with the weight of that tree coming down. Further along, we can see that the railings have been taken down as well. These look like corrugated steel railings, so they've really taken the brunt of the force, and there's still debris left on the floor as well at the nearby bus stop where the tree has been cut down, so we can really still see the full extent of this. Luckily it was half term, there were no children here, so nobody was injured in the playground and no casualties, but there certainly will be some effort to clear this up, and who knows how much it'll cost as well. And the other thing that we're looking out for in Yorkshire is potential flooding as well, because with this snow and with this rain it's likely that the rivers may rise and there's potential flooding. Alistair.
Anna, thank you very much indeed, and also Amelia and Bradley there as well. Thanks for all of your work yesterday, and keep in touch. Anything that develops, we'll want to know about it as well. So thank you very much indeed. That's GB News reporters out and about on your behalf. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends. We've plenty more still to come this afternoon. We'll be discussing the tensions that have escalated in Ukraine. Boris Johnson has just been recently speaking in the last half hour at that huge security conference in Munich and said that we must stand strong together, but also gave a lot more detail on those crucial economic sanctions. Plus, don't forget my sit-down interview with the Marmite man of politics, George Galloway, just after 1 o'clock. But first, let's bring you right up to date with all of the news. Here's Simon Pusey.
Thanks, Alistair. It's 12:35. I'm Simon Pusey in the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister has warned the invasion of Ukraine by Russia would bring about the destruction of a democratic state. Boris Johnson was speaking at the Munich Security Conference after the Kremlin confirmed it had successfully launched hypersonic missiles as part of nuclear drills. Kiev reported the death of a soldier killed in shelling by pro-Russian separatists. The Met Office has issued a new yellow warning for heavy snow, which could cause more travel disruption in Yorkshire and Lancashire today. Hundreds of thousands of homes are still without power after Storm Eunice hit the UK. Record-breaking winds killed at least 4 people, damaged buildings and brought down trees, blocking routes across the rail network. Downing Street says the Prime Minister has handed in his Met Police questionnaire as part of an investigation into allegations of parties held during lockdown. Operation Hillman is looking into whether COVID restrictions were broken at Number 10 and across Whitehall over the last 2 years. And Team GB has finally won a medal at the Winter Olympics, with the men's curling team taking silver. They lost to Sweden 5-4 in a nail-biting final in Beijing. The women's team is also in the final and will play Japan early tomorrow morning. The royal family tweeted their support, saying Great Britain's journey has been fantastic to watch and a great achievement. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to Alastair Stewart and Friends.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. It's coming up to 20 to 1 and you are watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News, TV and radio. The Munich Security Conference is well underway in Germany. It's an annual conference on international security policy that's been held in Munich since 1963. Speaking about Ukraine and the tensions there, the Prime Minister Boris Johnson gave a speech and said, and I quote, "The omens are grim from Russia." Johnson also said, and I quote again, "We should not underestimate the gravity of this moment and what is at stake. As I speak to you today, we do not fully know what President Putin intends, but the omens are grim, and that is why we must stand strong together." He says, "We are staring at a generation of bloodshed and misery." Well, joining me now is Philip Ingram, MBE, former senior military intelligence officer. Philip, always a pleasure to see you. Blood-curdling stuff about a generation of bloodshed. But what did you make about the more precise, focused detail of those sanctions that may just mean more to Russian wallets than Russian tanks?
Well, it's interesting. The support base that's keeping Putin and keeping his presidency going are the wider oligarchs and their financial backing. They've got the ability to bring him down if they so desire, and they're the only organizations or people that have got that ability. So if they feel that their money is being tied up and all of a sudden their lifestyles are being badly affected, that's the only way to potentially influence Vladimir Putin's political and diplomatic decision making.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you said that, because when I listened to it, I thought, oh, God, yeah, but you know what you're talking about. I'm just a mere commentator. Two specific points. Quotes Johnson, "We will make it impossible for them," the oligarchs, "to raise finance on the London capital markets. And secondly, crucially, we will open up the Matryoshka dolls, those multiple stack dolls of Russian-owned companies and entities, to find out the ultimate beneficiaries." He's on their case, they'll blink.
Yeah, they will do. And this is the only real way of putting pressure on Putin. You know, London is an international financial center, and that's why an awful lot of Russian money and money from other regimes around the world is focused through London. Everyone jumps on it and puts it as purely political. It's because we are at the center of the global economic might. And any sanctions that are taken through London and any restrictions that are put through London will then be reflected in global markets around the world. So this is a very, very real threat to Putin. Do I think it'll stop him? No.
No. That's fascinating. We'll bank that one and maybe say a little prayer, but reflect upon it. The other thing that he's gambling on is going online, directly talking to the Russian people, saying if your leader Putin invades, the coffins of your sons and daughters will stack up.
Yeah, and it's right and proper that he does that. You know, in our interconnected world, our world leaders, unlike the way President Trump did it, but our world leaders need to engage. It's almost certainly not Boris Johnson himself. It'll be his staff putting this out and very carefully worded messages. But you have to remember that the internet is filtered in Russia, and therefore a lot of these will probably not get through to the Russian people. Not that the Russian people have got much of a say on this.
Fascinating. Do you believe that the false flag and cyber conflict are, in effect, already underway? I mean, there's a lot of misinformation, to be fair, on both sides, and you can understand that's the way these things are played. But in your take, objective and professional, are we already in conflict with false flags and cyber warfare?
I think it started, you know, it's what I describe as a classic playbook. Putin and Lavrov, his foreign minister, love the Kosovo scenario, that where NATO went in on humanitarian grounds into Kosovo to protect the people from humanitarian disaster. He's trying to engineer that in Donbass, and everything that we're seeing at the minute is working along that playbook.
Philip, great experience and great insights. I'm really grateful. It's always a pleasure and a very reassuring one to see you there at the other end of the lens.
Thank you, Alistair.
Thank you very much indeed. That's Philip Ingram, MBE, who is a former senior military intelligence officer, or to put it another way, a been-there, done-it guy. Now, it's time for our Good Causes segment of the programme, where we shine a spotlight on an individual or group of individuals who've gone above and beyond to make the world a better place. My next guest is community advocate at Ollie. Ollie is a suicide prevention charity that trains professionals, parents and children to prevent and build resilience. She's going to Downing Street to discuss a new initiative next week, and I'm delighted to be joined here live in the studio by Vicky Gutteridge, Executive Assistant to the CEO and, as I said, community advocate at the Ollie Foundation. Ollie's not a person, Ollie's means...
One life lost is enough.
And this is all about young folk.
It is, Alistair. So it was a charity that was set up about 6 years ago, because tragically 3 parents had lost a teenage son, each of them to suicide. So they decided to come together. They met in bereavement support group, and they came together to do something to create some change, to make sure that we have suicide-safe communities. And so we do that by training and talks. Yeah. And we support parents, professionals, and young people themselves to.
Has it? I mean, have we just opened our eyes to it, or has it slightly snuck up upon us? Because the 3 guys you're talking about and the brilliant run that they did, and also there are examples where amazing young women have taken their own lives because of bullying online. Just talking to Philip Pullman about the potency of cyber. Is it therefore a crisis of this generation, or have we just not paid enough attention going back over the years?
We actually did a really brilliant talk on this about the history of suicide. And actually, if you go back through hundreds of years, actually suicide has been on the decrease, which you wouldn't really believe. But actually, if you look at it, that's actually what's happening. The fear that we have is with eco-anxiety, and what's happening with our world in the future, who knows? But what you wouldn't imagine is actually the opposite, even though we're in a very challenging time at the moment. But actually, if you look back over records, that is where we're at the moment. Yeah.
That's fascinating, because I didn't know that. That's why I asked the question.
Yeah.
So it's a double-barrelled question. You can take it in whatever order you want, or I'll split it up for you. But I know you're seeing the Prime Minister, and there are certain things that government can and can't do. But also, you train individual men and women, assuming that unfortunately the problem will persist. Which is most important? Training those frontline support staff, or knocking on number 10 and saying, get your finger out, do something?
It's a really good question. I would say the priority is you and me and every single one of us have the skills and capacity to save someone from suicide. So you don't have to be a professional. Actually, all you need is to have a listening ear and to give that extra time. So what we really feel at the Ollie Foundation, and the statistics say that actually over the pandemic, where you'd imagine an increase in suicide, because of social cohesion, because everybody said, are you okay? And it was all right to be vulnerable, and the stigma had gone. So actually, I would say, whilst it is a bit of a double-barrel question, and it's very hard to balance.
No, that's a brilliant answer. So let's park Downing Street. We'll both remember that we're going to talk about that again in a moment. Because the other thing that struck me when I was thinking about this conversation I knew we were going to have, that the lovely idea of, the Good Samaritan. You don't walk by on the other side. You see someone who's been knocked over or is poor, cold, hungry, you walk across and help. When it's a 16-year-old wrestling with their internal struggles, either be financial, be they drugs, be they emotional, be they whatever, you can't see it.
That's very true. And that's why we're at Ollie Foundation, we actually do training, because the most person a 16-year-old is going to turn to is probably their best friend, or not necessarily the safeguarding trained lead at the school that we would also train. So now we're putting in place these, it's a special training directly for that emotional contagion.
And signal spotting.
Yeah, but often there aren't necessarily a signal to spot, and that makes people feel...
So in effect, we're also saying to those young men and women wrestling with, I'm talking about wrestling with the soul of politics, but also wrestling with their souls, literally, is to say, for God's sake, open up, share. And if you're scared of mum and dad, scared of buddies and what have you, then come to us, come to Ollie.
Come to us, come to Ollie, and we can signpost you to support. We always signpost to professionals, but it really is just about creating that reducing the stigma. Let's talk about suicide. Let's say that word. It's very difficult.
Interestingly, same mantra from another charity I support, Missing People, is sometimes just a phone call. I'm not coming home. I've had enough of everything, but I'm letting you know I'm still alive, and this is what I'm wrestling with. We've got a couple of minutes left. So Downing Street, when he gets back from Munich, when he's hopefully brought peace to the world, but God knows what's going on, as my last guest was just saying, sit down opposite, eyeball the Prime Minister or somebody else? What do you say?
We say what the task that we really have is a cohort of people that are depressed is a very vulnerable cohort. Now, there's a real conflict here, because if you're depressed, you go to a GP and you may be prescribed antidepressants. Well, the conflict there is, whilst that's your right to do so, we all know the inherent black box signal on the back of a packet of antidepressants that can lead to suicidal thinking. And the problem that we have is that within that consultation, that might not be spoken about. So our aim is to ensure that all patients who have antidepressants have informed consent, that they know the risks and they know the support structures that can be in place. So the Ollie Foundation are creating a safer prescribing programme that will hopefully go into doctors' surgeries, into pharmacists, and it links the triangle between the GP...
So you want Sajid Javid at the meeting as well, don't you?
We would do, ideally. Can you do that, Alistair?
Finally, have you got any good MP buddies, men or women who are on side, know what you're talking about?
Daisy Cooper is our local MP for St Albans. She's fully behind this, which we really appreciate her support. So, and I'm really looking forward to going to number 11 on Tuesday and hopefully making a difference.
I tell you, the MPs, when they're good, they're very, very good. When they're bad, they're useless. But she sounds like a good one. Really good to meet you.
And you,
and keep in touch. Let us know how it goes, and particularly let us know how that meeting at Downing Street goes.
I will do. Thank you. Thanks so much.
Vicky Gutteridge there, Chief Executive Assistant, I should say, sorry, to the CEO and Community Advocate at the Ollie Foundation. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends. We have lots more coming up on the programme this afternoon. After 1 o'clock, I'll be joined by the leader of the Workers' Party of Britain, the former Labour MP, George Galloway, to discuss if politics is in search of its soul. But let's first bring you right up to date with the weather.
Rather windy with a band of rain and hill snow edging eastwards. Let's take a look at the details. It will be a windy day with coastal gales expected in the southwest. It will be mainly dry, but there will be isolated blustery showers, which will be heavy at times. Heavy rain will clear to the east of southeast England with scattered heavy showers following. It will be rather windy, especially towards the south. A windy day in Wales, especially towards the south coast where gales are likely. Rather cloudy with some brighter spells, but also some blustery showers. It will be cloudy in the northwest with outbreaks of rain at times, the rain falling as sleet or snow over the higher ground of the Pennines and Cumbria, brisk winds and also feeling chilly. The northeast of England will be generally drier and brighter with some sunny spells, although rain and hill snow will affect Pennine areas. The brightest conditions are expected to be in the north. It will be mostly dry over southern Scotland, with the best of the sunshine being in eastern areas, cloudier in the west with a few showers likely, these possibly wintry. Rain and hill snow will clear eastwards with scattered showers, possibly wintry, and sunny spells then following for the west. A chilly feeling day for all, especially in the wind, turning dry for a time this evening before further rain arrives in the west to affect most areas later, and that is how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
GBNews is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. It's just coming up to 5 to 1, and you're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News, TV and radio. Well, Storm Eunice has certainly left thousands of homes still without power today. That clean-up operation is underway after record-breaking winds killed at least 4 people and disrupted travel. Hundreds of flights were cancelled and trains were suspended. The Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps, said he expected travel disruption for another day or two. Well, Jim Dale is a meteorologist at the British Weather Services and always welcome. Glad to see you. I'm going to stick my neck out on that, and I'm not diminishing the tragedy of 4 people losing their lives and those fastest ever recorded winds off the Needles of the Isle of Wight.
Yeah.
But was this as intense as folk had feared, the worst in 30 years?
It's a very good question, and what I would say to you is trying to compare storms is a very difficult task. No 2 storms are the same. They affect different areas, different people. They do different damage, if you like. And when we can go back to 1987, if you like, and talk about the Great Storm. Now, that was not the one yesterday. Eunice was not on the same category as the Great Storm of 1987. That we can be sure of. I think we can possibly go back to 2014 and say that may be comparable, but as I say, we may be comparing apples and pears as far as storms are concerned. But it was up there, and if I'm going to put it into any bracket or whatsoever, it was definitely in the top 10 of the last 30, 40 years, so probably even the top 5. So that's about where it is.
And the other thing that struck me, listening to the stuff that we were pumping out yesterday, and indeed on other outlets as well, is that everybody was making the point that we seem to be having more and more storms. Arwen is still causing difficulties in certain parts of the world. Then we had Dudley quite recently, Eunice, and the Met Office bloke was saying, well, we may have to have another one fairly soon. Do you make any sense of that as a meteorologist?
I do, in 2 respects, and the next one to come, if it comes, will be Franklin, and it could come tomorrow. I won't go too wild with that one. It certainly will be a little bit wild and windy tomorrow, but we'll see whether it's not our job to name the storms, but certainly it's up there. So Franklin is the next one. Do I make sense of it? Yeah, I do. One of the things I would say is January is a very sedate month. Nothing happened. I had my feet up for most of the time. We had high pressure on top of us. So kind of in a way, this was overdue. And when you get the jet stream, the upper air winds coming back across the UK, then in a winter situation, you're in for a rough time potentially. And the potential was realised with Storm Eunice and before that Storm Dudley. So 2 in a row, a bit like waiting for the bus to arrive for a month and then all of a sudden to arrive at once. And that happened. The second part of that, of course, would be what I call the icing on the cake, not particularly a celebration cake, but what we're talking about there is global warming, climate change, and the addition that those 2 factors, or that factor brings to the party as far as storms are concerned. So this is a winter storm. Eunice is a winter storm. We may have got it anyway, and we probably would have got it. It's whether or not it's accelerated, exaggerated, if you like, by climate change and what that can actually add to the cake. And so the icing, the candle, call it what you want, but that's the sort of ingredient. I don't want to go down the wrong path here, but I am suggesting to you, and I've written the book behind me, which you can probably see, all about the next 20, 30 years and what we might actually be in for. And this is just a part of it. Yeah, we're still going to see winter storms, autumn storms, spring storms. But beyond that, wildfires and big snow events and all sorts of weather-related things brought about by our changing world climate. And that's what I think we're in for to come.
Fascinating. Final point, we've got about a minute left.
Yeah.
When you and I have talked about this before, actually more in the context of flooding, funnily enough, but it's the same issue. Yeah. Are the authorities finally getting it, what people like you are warning about? And are we slightly more resilient now than we were, say, 5, 10, 15 years ago?
Alice, I'm glad you said that, because I'm going to say openly, I think the meteorologists, if I can blow my own trumpet, I was on various channels, media and all the rest of it, including GB News, and the ferocity of this was stated well ahead of time. And I think many of the authorities out there got hold of it and realised it and acted upon it. So I think the loss of life, and even to an extent the loss of the damage, was reduced by the fact we actually got the warnings out in good time. And not just a warning that people put in the back pocket. People actually took notice, which was great.
Great. Jim, thank you very much indeed. Always a pleasure to talk to you. And nice to have some good news there as well, that you do all of your hard work and everybody else does. And eventually the penny drops, and that is rather good. Yeah. Thank you very much. Jim Dale there, meteorologist at British Weather Services. It's just coming up towards 1 o'clock, and we will be talking after the break to George Galloway and others about politics in search of its soul. The time is now exactly 1 o'clock here on GB News. And with that, hello and welcome back if you've been with me since 12 o'clock. Hello and welcome if you've just joined us. The time is literally 18 seconds past 1 o'clock. I'm Alastair Stewart, and we are into the final hour of the programme. I'll be keeping you company here on TV and radio, and we've plenty more still to come, including that sit-down interview with the former Labour MP and Respect MP, George Galloway. We had a really interesting conversation that stemmed today's big topic, is politics in search of its soul. All of that to come. But first, let's bring you right up to date with all of the news. Here's Simon Pusey.
Thanks, Alistair. It's 1 minute past 1. I'm Simon Pusey in the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister has warned the omens are grim from Russia and the world can't underestimate what's at stake if the country invades Ukraine. Boris Johnson told the Munich Security Conference it's staring at a generation of bloodshed if there's an incursion. His comments came after the Kremlin confirmed it had successfully launched hypersonic missiles as part of nuclear drills, and Kiev reported the death of a soldier killed in shelling by pro-Russian separatists.
If Ukraine is overrun by brute force, I fail to see how a country encompassing nearly 250,000 square miles, the biggest nation in Europe apart from Russia itself, could then be held down and subjugated forever. After a generation of freedom, we're now staring at a generation of bloodshed and misery. I believe that Russia would have absolutely nothing to gain from this catastrophic venture and everything to lose.
Also speaking in Munich, US Vice President Kamala Harris said Russia will suffer unprecedented financial costs if it invades Ukraine.
And we will target those who are complicit and those who aid and abet this unprovoked invasion. Make no mistake, the imposition of these sweeping and coordinated measures will inflict great damage on those who must be held accountable.
Well, earlier, the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen warned Moscow that its thinking from a dark past could cost Russia a prosperous future.
One only has to read the recent communiqué issued by Russian and Chinese leaders. They seek a new era, as they say, to replace the existing international rules. They prefer the rule of the strongest to the rule of law, intimidation instead of self-determination, coercion instead of cooperation.
Hundreds of thousands of homes are still without power across the UK after Storm Eunice. A clean-up is underway after record-breaking winds killed at least 4 people. Hundreds of flights were cancelled and trains suspended. There are still disruptions today, with people being asked to avoid travelling where possible. Several train lines remain closed. Meteorologist John Hammond says yellow weather warnings are still in force.
very worst is over. We're not going to see gusts as high as we saw yesterday, but we're in for a rough ride over the next few days, that is for sure. What we really want, of course, is prolonged calm weather, but that's not really what we're going to get. We are going to see some rain pushing in from the west through today, but the winds, probably more importantly, are going to pick up yet again.
Downing Street says the Prime Minister has handed in his Met Police questionnaire regarding allegations of parties held in Downing Street during lockdown. Operation Hillman is looking into whether COVID restrictions were broken at Number 10 and across Whitehall over the last 2 years. The NHS is to stop taking cash from the gambling industry for the treatment of people suffering from addiction. NHS England says the decision had been heavily influenced by patients who are uncomfortable about using services paid for by the industry, a view that has also been echoed by medics. More than 100 people have been arrested in the Canadian capital after 3 weeks of protests against the country's COVID restrictions. Police removed lorry drivers who had brought the city of Ottawa to a standstill. Those arrested had been detained on mischief charges and nearly 24 vehicles had been towed, including those blocking one of the city's major roads. Ottawa Police says one officer has a minor injury, but no protesters were hurt. And Team GB has finally won a medal at the Winter Olympics, with the men's curling team taking silver. They lost to Sweden 5-4 in a nail-biting final in Beijing. The women's team is also in the final and will play Japan early tomorrow morning. The royal family tweeted their support, saying Great Britain's journey has been fantastic to watch and a great achievement. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now let's get back to Alastair Stewart and friends.
Diamond, thank you very much indeed. I love curling, controlled aggression on the ice, just absolutely brilliant. And good luck the women coming up in the next 24 hours going for gold. We've lots coming up on this show in the next 45 minutes or so. I took a trip to Camden earlier this week to speak to one of the most controversial political figures in the UK. From anti-Semitism allegations to appearing on reality television and, of course, a turbulent political career, George Galloway has certainly made his mark in the United Kingdom. I started by asking him, a man I've known for over 40 years, if he thinks the UK will ever vote for full-blooded socialism. George, it's great to see you, and I want to start with what to me seems to be the obvious and biggest question, given all that I know about what makes you tick. Do you believe that the majority of UK citizens will ever vote for full-blooded socialism?
No, but then I think that what we define as full-blooded socialism is beginning to change. A country like China, for example, which has many downsides to it, has managed somehow to synthesize both capitalism and socialism and has produced an economic miracle, which is why some people hate it. So it's a moving feast, if you like. It's a work in progress, what socialism is.
But individual citizens still working their butts off as hard as they can to earn their crust and keep as much of that as they can, and even inventing brand new companies and setting them up, that gets thumbs up from Galloway.
Yes, I'm in favour of that. I'm in favour of small and medium-sized enterprises achieving the maximum support from the state. I believe that the state should control the commanding heights of the economy, not necessarily own them, but command them.
That's a subtle edit of Clause 4 of the Labour Party
yes,
that Blair threw out.
It is subtle. Subtlety is my middle name. And you know, as that great Marxist Groucho said, when the facts change, so do my opinions.
And John Maynard Keynes on the other side. Are you still a parliamentarian as a Democrat?
Yes, and I, if I may say so, I think I was relatively good at it. I achieved awards. Even The Spectator gave me the Parliamentary Debater of the Year award. But I don't think Parliament is the finished article either. I think there are many things wrong with our Parliament, not the least of which is that half of it is unelected and stuffed full of cronies and flatmates and donors. And, you know, when I first went into Parliament 35 years ago now, it was stuffed with the putrefying corpses of the English aristocracy, as I used to say. It's actually got worse. Now it's stuffed with the party donors and cronies and so on. And so Parliament isn't the finished article either, but a directly elected, democratically chosen and removable assembly has to be the way forward for a democratic people like ours.
We've known each other for nearly half a century. You've become a reformist.
Well, in a way. In fact, the far left used to always call me a reformist.
Oh,
because,
really?
Yes, because I was in the Labour Party and never a communist, never a Marxist or a Leninist, still less a Trotskyist. I was never any of those things.
So not a million miles from the likes of Charles Clarke?
No, I would say I'm a Benite. I would say that Mr. Ben, the late Mr. Ben, is the best Prime Minister that we never had, but closely followed by John Smith. So, yes, I'm not for the revolutionary overthrow of the way we are. I'm not for, arresting the royal family or even the plutocrats. I'm in favour of common sense socialism. And I think there's a bigger and bigger market for that.
Why then respect and now the Workers' Party of Britain? At what point did you give up on Labour and why?
Well, they gave up on me. Tony Blair expelled me from the party in 2003.
Yeah, but Mike Gapes hasn't set up a fresh party or many others.
That's true. But I still believed, number one, that there was life in the perspective of politics that I had, and two, life in me. If you think about it, I was expelled almost 20 years ago, and I'm still going kind of strong now. So 20 years ago, I wasn't ready for retirement. And I still believed that the stance that I took on the Iraq War, which, by the way, is more or less shared by everybody now, even if they won't necessarily admit it in public, was the right one. And I put it to the test in Bethnal Green and Bow in 2005 and had a triumphant victory, one that was repeated in Bradford West in 2012. And I'm still going. The Workers' Party does what it says on the tin. It stands up for the workers above all, the producers of all wealth, and the people who don't have a party now speaking for them.
But it was profoundly wrong in the Gulf War, as you just quoted John Smith as one of your great heroes, because he echoed it as well at the time when the party expelled you. You don't incite treason, you don't incite rebellion amongst the armed forces of this country when they are on a mission in the Queen's name and in the country's name. That was a major error of judgment on your part.
Except I didn't. That's what they charged me with, but any impartial observer of my stand at the time would deny that. As a matter of fact, I have stood by the troops, for example, opposing their criminalization, putting them on trial and so on. It's the politicians that should be on trial, not the poor infantry.
Well, you've made that crystal clear with Tony Blair, which flows directly from all of those events as well. And you've produced a film, a video, and it has a huge audience for it. It's not going to happen. He's going to get his knighthood. You're not going to put him on trial. Has it not become a dangerous fixation for you now?
No, I'll never forget what was done, any more than people of a previous generation can forget the Second World War and the crimes of fascism and so on. I still remember every day and force my large social media following to follow every day the crimes of the Holocaust, for example. I'm probably the most prodigious retweeter of the Auschwitz Museum's output, which it's vital that people remember for fear of repeating all these things. So
let me jump ahead to it. That's a crucial point, but you leap ahead to my logic. I was going to come to that in a moment because of your departure from talk radio over allegations of anti-Semitism because of a football club. And you denied it then, as you've just denied it forcefully there. But you do still stand accused in the public mind of being, if not anti-Semitic, profoundly anti-Israel. And an awful lot of Jewish people will say, if you're anti-Israel, you're anti-Judaism.
Well, they're wrong to say that, and any serious examination of the history of this conflict would make that clear. Some of the greatest proponents of Palestinian rights and critics of Israel are themselves Jewish. I had one on my show. Gideon Levy of Haaretz newspaper is possibly the most respected journalist and commentator there's ever been in Israel. And you couldn't slip sixpence between his view and mine. So, no, it's a foolish tabloidization to equate opposition to the crimes of a political state with hatred and loathing of a religion or a national group. After all, I'm also one of the main critics of Saudi Arabia, but nobody would accuse me of hating Muslims.
Let me link that with where we were previously in the conversation, because allegations of anti-Semitism within Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party were profound, and Sir Keir Starmer is still wrestling with the aftermath of them, not least, I mean, Mike Gapes is one, and other people that have been through that same road. Do you believe that because of that and because of the Iraq War and the rest of it, the Labour Party is now a lost cause, and that your legacy, or part of your legacy, you'd like to be the end of the Labour Party as we now see it?
I wish it oblivion. I think it's a lost cause, but not for the reasons that you cite, at least not substantially for those reasons. I now trace the decline of the Labour Party, some of your viewers won't like this, to the turn to liberal, individualistic identity politics, which began long before Jeremy Corbyn. I sort of sensed it happening. At the time, I always say the decline of the Labour Party began when summer schools began to sit in a circle rather than in serried ranks and be talked to by an expert. I remember thinking at the time, well, actually, I'd rather hear the expert.
Someone on the programme recently said, encapsulating that or perhaps knocking it forward slightly, and on economic policy and on competition and on the rest of it, it's become Tory light.
Yes, although even the Tories are Blairites now. I mean, when I hear people say, and I do all the time, this is the most right-wing Tory government we've ever had and so on. First of all, they must be very young, or they must have lost their memory. They mustn't know about Margaret Thatcher and Keith Joseph and Norman Tebbit and the hobnailed boots of the Thatcher era if they really think that Boris Johnson is the most right-wing Prime Minister we've ever had. Boris Johnson is himself a liberal. I think the Conservatives and the Labour Party are now both essentially liberal parties. And that leaves a lot of scope for people like Farage and co on the right and people like me on the left.
Do you think when you met with Saddam Hussein in 1994 and famously said, "Sir, I salute your courage, your strength, your indefatigability," that in terms of a serious political player in the United Kingdom, you never recovered?
Well, you wouldn't be here now, 20...
No, well, I would be, because I'm genuinely interested in thoughts. And I speak to people who I've known for a long time who take different views to me, same views as me. But I now look at you, and your first answer, having become a reformist in many senses, I find intriguing. But also I look at you and think, what could have been? And in 1994... in a brilliant speech, you left yourself incapable of being repaired.
I was been elected to Parliament many times since then, twice more or less as an independent against the Labour Party. So that wouldn't seem to be a public judgment. It's a journalistic judgment that some have made and some inside the political machine. Yes, but the man who greeted me on the day I returned from Iraq, in the midst of that storm, was the late John Smith, who came into the tea room with his tray of fish and chips and looked around as to where he was going to sit. And he came and sat with me. And sotto voce, he said to me, "Don't trouble yourself about it. It'll all pass." And pass indeed it did. I've never forgotten that. I wrote about it at the time. John Smith was a very great man and a very great loss. And if we hadn't lost him, we never would have had Tony Blair. And therefore, we might not have had the Iraq War. And you might therefore now be speaking to me as a Labour member of Parliament, or, I don't know, perhaps a Labour peer.
Well, I know one thing absolutely for sure. It wouldn't be as a peer because you simply, like many others before you, you'd have simply said no. There is a war between the Ukraine and Russia at the moment, as we speak. If Putin decided that for whatever reason he was going to invade Ukraine, would you support him?
There's absolutely no possibility whatsoever that the Russians will invade.
If you were wrong and the Russians invaded, would you support him?
Not if it was an unprovoked and lying act that he carried out. I would not, no.
You said when the Soviet Union collapsed, and we've talked about this before because I was in Berlin in 1989, which set that ball rolling. You said it broke your heart when the Soviet Union collapsed. I completely understand that. But is Putin an honourable successor to the likes of Marx and Lenin and even Gorbachev?
He's not a communist at all.
He's a crook.
Which is one of
He's a lawbreaker. He's a crook.
Which is one of the reasons why I find this conflict so perplexing. With China, okay, it's an existential threat. It's a different system. But Russia is a white, Christian, capitalist, European country. There seems no reason why it should perpetually be our enemy. Indeed, your own colleague on GBNews, Neil Oliver, has posed that question. Why are we so intent upon trouble with Russia? So I don't believe that Putin is a communist or that he's trying to recreate the Soviet Union. But I do believe that the period that was provoked by the collapse of the Soviet Union was the most dangerous period of all. Unipolar power in the world is inherently an extremely dangerous thing. And that brought us the Iraq war that we've spent so much time talking about even now, today.
Do you respect Ukraine's right to desire membership of the European Union and NATO?
The European Union, for sure. NATO would be an act of foolhardiness, almost impossible to exaggerate. So I think joining NATO would be foolhardy. And I see that the Ukrainian ambassador to London on the BBC has said that the Ukraine may very well be prepared to drop its intention to join NATO, and that would be the best solution. It's a common sense solution, you see.
First part of my conversation with the former Labour and Respect MP, George Galloway, which stemmed today's conversation, is politics in search of its soul? Plenty more still to come this afternoon on Alastair Stewart and Friends. After the break, we'll hear more from George Galloway, and then we will be reflecting upon it all with a good friend of mine, Baroness Claire Fox. But first, let's bring you up to date with the weather.
Rather windy with a band of rain and hill snow edging eastwards. Let's take a look at the details. It will be a windy day with coastal gales expected in the southwest. It will be mainly dry, but there will be isolated blustery showers, which will be heavy at times. Heavy rain will clear to the east of southeast England with scattered heavy showers following. It will be rather windy, especially towards the south. A windy day in Wales, especially towards the south coast where gales are likely. Rather cloudy with some brighter spells, but also some blustery showers. It will be cloudy in the northwest with outbreaks of rain at times, the rain falling as sleet or snow over the higher ground of the Pennines and Cumbria, brisk winds and also feeling chilly. The northeast of England will be generally drier and brighter with some sunny spells, although rain and hill snow will affect Pennine areas. The brightest conditions are expected to be in the north. It will be mostly dry over southern Scotland, with the best of the sunshine being in eastern areas, cloudier in the west with a few showers likely, these possibly wintry. Rain and hill snow will clear eastwards with scattered showers, possibly wintry, and sunny spells then following for the west. A chilly feeling day for all, especially in the wind, turning dry for a time this evening before further rain arrives in the west to affect most areas later, and that is how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube. You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. It's 1:25, and you're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News TV and radio. I hope you saw part one of my interview with George Galloway before the break, where we spoke in depth about the way he sees Parliament at the moment. Many of you on social media have been saying, I disagree with everything he says, but thank you for letting me hear what he thinks and for probing him and testing him. I really appreciate that. So now it's time for part two. I asked him what he makes of the UK's broadcasting terrain. Here's what he had to say. How do you view, amidst all of the talk of the BBC being in existential decline, the state of UK broadcasting?
Well, I do think this is a revolutionary period, and we're lucky still to be functioning in it. Now, I have almost 2 million followers on social media. I can communicate with them at the touch of a keyboard key. That is a tremendous, revolutionary change that couldn't even have been imagined back then when we first met. So I thank God I'm alive and still talking, still thinking, still agitating, if you like, for the point of view that I have. And it's never going to be turned back.
No. Indeed, when we first met, we were, relatively speaking, young men. And it's mainly young men and women these days and others who say it's the BBC that's let them down. It's turned them off politics. It's turned them off society. It's turned them off democracy. To me, that's a really profound worry.
The first B in the acronym BBC is British. It's my view that over the last near decade now, the British Broadcasting Corporation has lost the British. It actually seems to dislike the prevailing culture, the decisions, democratic decisions of the British people. It has fought a rearguard action, for example, against Brexit. There is a flagrant breach of trust with the people who pay for it. I live in Scotland. BBC Scotland is a flag-waving, banner-carrying, proselytising advocate for the breakup of the very Britain which pays the wages of the people in the British Broadcasting Corporation. And it has slowly, but now picking up momentum, lost all credibility. And I think the era, and I think we'll live long enough to see it, there'll be no more license fee, there'll be no more cosseting of the privileged echelons of the BBC with their unbelievable salaries. And it's nothing to do with envy when I say that. I have more than enough money. It's that the public are forced as a poll tax to pay inflated salaries for inferior product, and the news product oftentimes seems to be bent upon actually demoralising the British people rather than bringing them together.
You mentioned Scotland there, and you are, the clues in the accent, I've lost mine, but you're profoundly proud of being a Scot, and unusually you are a dyed-in-the-wool unionist, not a conservative and unionist, far from it, but you're a unionist. Do you believe that your side, whether it be Labour, Tory, Liberal or Galloway, have seen off another attempt for Scotland to go independent, or do you think Sturgeon may still one day win the day?
I don't think she'll win the day. I think the Scots are too canny to jump over a cliff, at least without having a proper calculation of the coins involved. The Scots are careful with their money. They know that the leap into the dark of separatism is a very unwise judgment, and they won't make it. But the incipient and I think toxic idea of separatism, which is based upon nationalism, which is based upon exceptionalism and dislike, even perhaps in some cases a hatred. So dislike of your neighbour is a very demeaning and potentially dangerous thing. And I'm sorry to say that approximately 25% to 30% of our compatriots are in the grip of that kind of mentality. But it'll never reach
penultimate
a majority.
Question. I mentioned Nicola and you commented upon it. Let's go back to our youth, as it were, and it informs my two final questions. The first is this. We both know Nicola Sturgeon, but we also knew Donald Dewar. We both know Boris Johnson, or certainly know of him, but we also knew Margaret Thatcher. We know Sir Keir Starmer, but we also knew Tony Blair and others before him. How do you rate the current calibre across the spectrum of those that we are blessed to have leading us or seeking to lead us?
I'm glad you asked me that, because I think that if you force me to give one takeaway of how it was then and how it is now, it would be that everyone got smaller. In the case of Donald Dewar and Nicola Sturgeon, actually literally as well as metaphorically, but that's true across the board. When I entered Parliament 35 years ago, there were more than 100, well over 100 men and women of independent mind who, when they rose in the chamber, you actually did not know what they were going to say. Pagers hadn't been invented yet. No one put them on message. They were people that were unpredictable, therefore, in that sense, and possessed of themselves big ideas and big concepts in politics, which all seem to have been frittered away. So was it Greta Garbo who said, "I'm still big, it's the pictures that got small"? That's how I feel. Yeah. I feel I'm still big, but the picture got small. I mean, I used to sit between Dennis Healy, a beachmaster at Anzio, and Peter Shore, the giant figure in the opposition to joining the EU back in 1973, the man whose liquid gold of 8 minutes at the Oxford Union was the best argument against joining the EU back in 1975's referendum that you'll ever hear. I used to sit between them.
Yeah.
Substantial figures of historical importance. I gaze across the Parliament now. First of all, I scarcely know who the people are that are speaking. They often resign from jobs I never knew that they had in the first place. And I'm struck by how small the political class got.
Final point, we began talking about China and you said a lot of things that I genuinely didn't expect. And that's why I dubbed you a reformist, as it were, but in a good way. And I can remember when that revolution took place in China in the late 70s and the market reforms were imposed. There are still huge human rights problems in China. We both agree on that. I know that for a fact, so we don't need to go there. But here's the thing about George Galloway. You have always been of the left, clearly, transparently so, but you supported Brexit. You mentioned Peter there, and we've talked about Tony Benn already. And yet, as a man of the left, you're as against counterculture as some of my most right-wing political friends, many of whom work at GBNews. What the heck are you really?
Well, never confuse me with a liberal. Being a socialist is not the same thing at all as being a liberal. I have never been a liberal. I have always believed that Labour spent too much time worrying about criminals than the victims of criminals. I've always believed in the family. I am the father of 6 children. I'm against drugs. I'm against alcohol. I'm against abortion. I'm against euthanasia, and have spoken and written on these things over many decades. So I am socially conservative and economically radical. And I believe in an independent foreign policy. I believe in a Britain independent, both of the European Union and the United States of America. And I believe in our culture. I believe in our language. I think it's the greatest, most fruitful language and culture that the world has yet seen. I'm schooling my eldest son, 14, right at this minute on Shakespeare. He said to me, I find Shakespeare boring. I said, boring? Bring your books to me and I'll go through it with you. So I believe in our people. I believe in their greatness. I believe in our country, our language, our culture. And some people say that makes me a conservative. I believe it makes me a patriotic socialist, a common sense socialist.
Great to see you.
And you.
George Galloway, as I said, known him for 40 years, and goodness me, he chops and changes in what really makes him tick. But if he is chopping and changing in what makes him tick, he can explain it and argue it with a greater eloquence than many. It's all about ideas, and you'll see why I underline that word in just a few moments. You are watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends. We'll be reflecting on that sit-down interview with George Galloway in just a moment with Baroness Claire Fox, great friend of mine and the boss of the Institute of Ideas. But first, let's get the news with Simon Pusey.
Hello, it's 1:35. I'm Simon Pusey in the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister has told the Munich Security Conference the omens are grim from Russia and the world can't underestimate what's at stake if the country invades Ukraine. His comments came after the Kremlin confirmed it had successfully launched hypersonic missiles as part of nuclear drills, and Kiev reported the death of a soldier killed in shelling by pro-Russian.
And if Ukraine is overrun by brute force, I fail to see how a country encompassing nearly 250,000 square miles, the biggest nation in Europe apart from Russia itself, could then be held down and subjugated forever. After a generation of freedom, we're now staring at a generation of bloodshed and misery. I believe that Russia would have absolutely nothing to gain from this catastrophic venture and everything to lose.
The Met Office has issued a new yellow warning for heavy snow, which could cause more travel disruption in Yorkshire and Lancashire today. Hundreds of thousands of homes are still without power after Storm Eunice hit the UK yesterday. Record-breaking winds killed at least 4 people, damaged buildings and brought down trees, blocking lines across the rail network. Insurers have indicated the clean-up could cost more than £300 million. And Team GB has finally won a medal at the Winter Olympics, with the men's curling team taking silver. They lost to Sweden 5-4 in a nail-biting final in Beijing. The women's team is also in the final and will play Japan early tomorrow morning. The royal family tweeted their support, saying Great Britain's journey has been fantastic to watch and a great achievement. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. I'll be back with the latest headlines at the top of the hour.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube. You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. It's 20 to 2. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends on GB News. Goodness me, you've had a lot to say about that interview with George Galloway. I've got one that's just dropped from Leslie. Thank you very much indeed. Quotes, George, are you sure you're a Conservative? And then a smiley emoji, but I think we know what he was getting at. And this one from Rory, not my friend Rory McCallion, another Rory, who says, socially conservative, economically radical, opposed to abortion and euthanasia, unionist, Brexiteer. I find myself uncomfortably in agreement with George Galloway across a broad spectrum. That hasn't happened before. Just quite remarkable. Now, another Rory. George sounds sensible and balanced. Alistair giving him a chance to answer fully, but doesn't let him off the grilling him gently but persistently on Saddam Hussein. Salute blunder. That is from my friend Rory McCallion. Kev says, had respect for George's integrity when you were being bullied in public school. That's a reference to somebody else in the conversation. His appearance before the Senate has stood the test of time against Blair's illegal war. Don't always agree with him, but he is a conviction politician with integrity. Clara, personally, I think it's good to have a broad range of guests. Couldn't agree with you more, Clara, and thank you. I don't agree with Galloway's politics, but it's always good to listen to those who you don't agree with, 100%. James, nowadays you can't have one without the other. If you are critical, it's because you're anti or you're racist. It doesn't matter what it's about or how valid it is. Might be you're just not allowed to have that debate. Well, that hits the nail upon the head as far as my next guest is concerned. We've been speaking today about whether the whole world of politics is in search of its soul. We've heard what George Galloway thinks, Sir John Curtis, the number cruncher, and also Labour MP Lloyd Russell Moyle joining us from Brighton. Shortly we'll be hearing my take and lots more of yours. But first, to give her take is writer, broadcaster, free speech campaigner and good friend of mine, Baroness Claire Fox, who I know for a fact has been listening to it because she's also been tweeting about it. You're good at answering this sort of woolly question, but what was your standout line, your standout take, Claire, from what Galloway's just been saying?
Actually, it's more one of your tweeters who's just contacted you, which is, it's so rare to hear a conviction politician. And in some ways, whatever one thinks about George Galloway, and he and I have both agreed and disagreed over the years, what you know is that he comes at politics from a good faith position. He's trying to work things through. He's not interested in what labels people attach to him. And one of the difficulties that we've had over the last decades is that we've been, had a parliament full of technocrats. So one of the things that George made very clear was that he remembers standing in between, as he said, the big beasts of politics, people like Peter Shaw, people with big ideas. You didn't know what they were going to say next. And my goodness, we miss that. I think that's an extraordinary observation, but really true, because you say, where's has politics got any soul? I mean, it's become soulless, managerial, technocratic. Nobody seems to believe anything very much. It's all about optics.
And I also found that fascinating when he was reflecting the political balance in his observations, whether it was men and women of the left or the right. It was those towering figures, Ben, and I've shared an admiration for him, but also people like Margaret Thatcher and Keith Joseph, first-class brains again, whether or not you agreed with them. Is it simply because they're technocrats, or are we just going through a bad time with the quality of our leaders on either side of the divide?
So it's definitely on either side of the divide, but I don't think it's just a kind of blip in history. I think, dare I say it, that this has got something to do with the Brexit question, because one of the things that happened was, I think that we've had a political elite that became almost, what they were good at was just interpreting EU laws. You know, people who were very good at saying, we'll deliver what we need to deliver. We take the rule book of the EU, we make it happen. But what they lost, therefore, was a different part of politics, which was the ability to go out and convince voters of a particular position, because what they do was they were more interested in influencing people in Strasbourg or Brussels than they were in convincing voters. And the other thing that George said, by the way, he was right about the House of Lords, even though it's an irony because I'm in it. I mean, I agreed with everything he said about its anti-democratic nature. But, you know, it's not just that we've got an unelected House of Lords. I do think that democracy itself has been emptied out. I think that the attitudes to voters over the last decades has also become one where they're being talked at, being done to, not taken seriously as equals, as people that, you know, almost like the politicians should be frightened of. They're very good at going out and getting polls done, you know, where they're doing polls, what do the voters think? But they don't actually go out and talk to them and meet them, look them in the eye and try and convince them of issues. And so I think that's really what's gutted politics on the left and right. And I'm beginning to feel that the left and right labels are unhelpful these days.
Which is a good thing. And let me pick up something you said a few moments ago, and that is post-COVID, not getting into all of the arguments about that, but if we are moving into a territory where maybe we've got intellectual space and time to think about these issues, what I wanted to ask today, and you know it because we've mentioned it before, is the degree to which in that new space both Labour and the Conservatives are seeking out something pretty profound to go forward with. And Lord Frost, David Frost in The Telegraph again today. Steve Baker is another who is really saying, look, what do we actually stand for in the Conservative Party? And you've got people in the Labour Party saying exactly the thing. Are we on the brink of something exciting and something fresh?
God, I wish so. I wish so. I'm afraid I'm not convinced. I was very glad to see the Lord Frost article in The Telegraph, not because I went along with all his completely with his pro-market stuff, but it really was an intelligent attempt at understanding the world. I mean, I think it was quite brave to take on, for example, the problems of devolution and the fracturing nature of that. He certainly says some very interesting things that I'm sympathetic with on the net zero and how levelling up. I mean, he makes a very good point about the Conservative Party making the mistake of trying to play the red wall by kind of throwing baubles at them and missing the nature of what people want, which is economic dynamism, a very different thing than kind of being given handouts by the state. So I think that was thoughtful. I'm less convinced that the Labour Party are anywhere near rethinking who they are. They're so busy distancing themselves from Corbynism that they've just ended up in a kind of third-rate Blairist position, it seems to me. There doesn't seem to be very much going on. But some of the big issues that the Labour Party needs to tackle, probably the Conservatives as well, but the Labour Party and the left have become associated with identity politics, which is incredibly divisive, and the Labour Party just will not tackle that. They've become associated with more censorship, and they're the people who are likely to call for no platforming. They're the kind of people who often will want to distance themselves from something like GBNews. Lots of Labour Party, politicians, too easy to use the terms far right, call people racist and so on. These things have ended up appearing to be, and that's because they are, a real attack on ordinary working class people, because they're trying to say, as they did around Brexit, you lot are kind of Neanderthal knuckle draggers, we want nothing to do with you. Now that's their base. I'm afraid that when you've got that going on, and I care about the Labour Party more if you want, because, you know, I suppose coming from the left, it just drives me mad that the left has become so reactionary in so many ways and devoid of any principle.
The other thing that my earlier guest, Lloyd Russell Moyle, the relatively young and therefore hadn't been around for years and years and years, Member of Parliament for Brighton Pavilion, he was saying that the issue of freedoms and free speech are very much on the agenda, which is absolutely Steve Baker territory, to a lesser extent Lord Frost, but he's on that subject as well. But absolutely Baker stuff. That to you must be milk and honey.
Yeah, and I'm glad that he said that, although I've yet to see much evidence that that's the kind of driving force in the Labour Party. I mean, I've really been genuinely shocked in the House of Lords that I'm afraid the Labour benches and freedom and free speech have not been something that I associate. It's almost like they don't recognise the concept of freedom. And you'll know that it's become fashionable to say that anyone who argues for free speech is a bit dodgy. You know, that somehow that means that you're just trying to cover up bigotry. But you also see, like, how would I be convinced that things have changed? Well, look at what's happening with the truckers in Canada without going into any detail of it. Regardless of what you think about what the truckers are doing in those demonstrations, the fact that the Canadian government are actually freezing their bank accounts, you know, sending in the horses and tear gas today, using some of the most draconian powers ever, I would expect any kind of a freedom-embracing party on the left or right in the UK, all of those politicians would be absolutely denouncing that, showing solidarity with the truckers, regardless, even if you don't agree with them, saying the right to protest is fundamental. This is a serious attack on democracy. Even The Economist, by the way, has said that the Canadian government have treated the truckers abysmally. And it's not because they're on their side, but they can see how damaging it is for liberalism. But where are the British politicians that are standing out and arguing against it? I mean, you say Steve Baker. I mean, I think Steve Baker's done a tweet. That's hardly the political elite in the UK standing up as one. Now, we know that they're prepared to do that when they condemn China, or look at everybody's clamouring to condemn Russia. So everybody could, it might only be words, but they could clamour to condemn Trudeau.
All
so
right.
when you say free speech, you need to make that speech say something interesting.
Yeah. Two observations from me. We've run out of time, but A, Steve Baker may not be the political elite yet, but watch this space, in my humble opinion. And the second thing is, you may or may not have noticed, but I've had a heck of a schooling over the last 12 hours about the importance of Canada as a result of my saying I'm not entirely sure that there's such a big appetite for news on Canada, and I have been well and truly put in my place by a lot of people, your good self included. Claire, thanks for your time. Always a pleasure to see you, and a real pleasure to talk to you as well. I hope you have a great Saturday afternoon. And thank you very much.
Thank you, and a great show, Alistair, by the way. Great show.
You're very kind. Thank you. Claire Fox there. I genuinely think it's been one of the most interesting periods in politics, and I hope very much you've enjoyed our conversation. When I say most interesting period in politics, I genuinely mean for quite some time. It reminds me, not just because I was talking to Galloway, but it reminds me of the late 1970s and Thatcher's victory in 79, and then she saw off Michael Foot, a genuine, intellectually vibrant champion of the left and hopes and beliefs for the left, with her mantras of freedom, markets and a smaller state in 83. The results, 79, 83 and thereafter, are of course history, but the arguments are still vital. We're here again. Keir Starmer seeking to retake the middle ground and getting hammered by the left for his efforts. Top Tories saying their party has lost its way and needs to get back to more of the Thatcherite beliefs. And then there's the whole issue of the power of the state, our individual freedoms, and the rights of the individual. You, the electorate, seem to have an open mind. The polls suggest Keir Starmer is regaining territory, but not enough of it to dream of anything approaching an electoral slam dunk. The Tories are certainly in trouble, but it doesn't seem to be terminal. And on who you think would make the best Prime Minister, as many support none of the above as support either Boris Johnson or Sir Keir Starmer. So evidently, it's all to play for. That's why we did what we did today, because what I enjoy most is that there are still people out there on the left, on the right, and among the libertarians who are up for a debate. I hope you enjoyed it. I really think it matters. More of your splendid thoughts. Let's get underway straight away because we've only got about 7 minutes left. Jane says we need a strong, patriotic Prime Minister. Boris is talking about invasion in Ukraine. What about talking about the invasion of the UK by illegal immigrants and getting taxpayers to foot the bill? The whole government needs to change. Law and order needs to be sorted out. I've always voted Conservative, but now there is no party I would vote for. Change the voting system and make it the person you vote for. And if they do not stick to what they prioritise in an election, then they have to resign. I'm sick of this government and all of its problems. Thank you, Jane. Rich goes, Labour blew any chance of power the moment they turned their backs on the white working class in favour of the inner city middle-class tourists. As a white working-class Englishman who voted for Brexit, I can say that I think that I speak for everyone else from that group when I say I will never vote Labour again. Philip, my MP has a massive majority. She's a member of the Cabinet. She has no time for her constituents. Never seen her. Doesn't reply to letters, emails. She was flown in from another part of the country. I'd love to have an MP who cares about the constituency. Dorothy, I have no faith with Labour. They seem to have no real vision for the future of Britain other than finding trivial backstabbing. The Conservatives are at least trying to get the country back on track. Boris has a very uphill task with big issues such as Brexit, COVID, Russia, cost of living and more. His speech to the Munich conference was delivered with great feeling for the people of Ukraine and the backing of Europe. And George says, despite the deficiencies of our present government, the prospect of a Lib-Lab coalition is still laughable. In politics, 2 minutes do not make a plus. We've got Lee, Tom and Richard. Can I do those as well? Yeah, sorry, I'm talking to the person who's talking in my ear, just watching the clock there because I know the time. Just two more then. Lee, here's the thing that most have not considered. It's been 5 years since the referendum, yet some Remain voters choose to outright refuse to honour that vote. They still declare the willingness to betray that vote and return to the European Union. Fascinating. And Tom, the left are too entangled in being social justice warriors to get anything important done, and the right are too busy sucking up to rich people. So neither get anything done in reality. And finally, I have one from Richard. All that left and right rubbish is for the bin. Boris is Tory only in name. Only his pals have more in common with the champagne socialists in the Labour Party than the people who voted him. We have a controlled government and opposition. They are out and out liars. Well, there you have it. Food for thought and quite explosive, some of it too. That's all that we have time for today. I'll be back tomorrow at midday when we'll be discussing the ongoing sanctions in Ukraine. But for now, from me, very good afternoon to you.
Rather windy with a band of rain and hill snow edging eastwards. Let's take a look at the details. It will be a windy day with coastal gales expected in the southwest. It will be mainly dry, but there will be isolated blustery showers, which will be heavy at times. Heavy rain will clear to the east of southeast England with scattered heavy showers following. It will be rather windy, especially towards the south. A windy day in Wales, especially towards the south coast where gales are likely. Rather cloudy with some brighter spells, but also some blustery showers. It will be cloudy in the northwest with outbreaks of rain at times, the rain falling as sleet or snow over the higher ground of the Pennines and Cumbria. Brisk winds and also feeling chilly. The northeast of England will be generally drier and brighter with some sunny spells, although rain and hill snow will affect Pennine areas. The brightest conditions are expected to be in the north. It will be mostly dry over southern Scotland, with the best of the sunshine being in eastern areas, cloudier in the west with a few showers likely, these possibly wintry. Rain and hill snow will clear eastwards with scattered showers, possibly wintry, and sunny spells then following for the west. A chilly feeling day for all, especially in the wind, turning dry for a time this evening before further rain arrives in the west to affect most areas later, and that is how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
Join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain every Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m. A news hour that comes with a trigger warning. Scorching hot opinion with prominent guests saying the unsayable and a little bit of weekend fun thrown in. Unlike other broadcasters, I won't be forgetting what the B in our name stands for. So Howie in for Real Britain, Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate.
From all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube. You can watch us live 24/7